Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today is going to be a super fun one, for me anyway, because we're going to be talking about Chahoua, my absolute favorite species. So this one goes out to all those Chahoua fans out there, or the Chahoua curious. This one is for you. We're going to be talking about how to build your Chahoua project from scratch. We're going to go over how to make a successful project, and by successful, I mean going towards the goals that you want for your project. It's individual, it's very subjective depending on what you want to produce. So we're going to talk about how to create those goals for yourself, how to put all the pieces together to move in the direction that you would like for your projects. So let's get into it. I'm super excited. But hold up one second. You might ask yourself, what is a Chahoua anyway, and why should I care? Well, Chahoua are a gecko species, arboreal gecko species from New Caledonia, very similar to crested geckos and Lichianus and gargoyle geckos, if you've heard of them or are familiar with them. They're very easy to care for, but the main thing that you're going to need to know for today is that they come in two different localities, mainland and Pine Island. You can choose to work with either locality, they're both great. You can't really tell by appearance which is which, so you'll just want to ask when you're buying a gecko what the locality is and what the lineage of that animal is. You can't really tell by appearance alone, so that's the only thing I would say is before you get started, you'll want to figure out which of the two localities that you're going to want to work with and stick within that. I would say go with one locality or the other. It's going to set you on a better path in the future once you do start caring about locality. If you have crosses, then that's all you have. So I would definitely advise choosing your locality, and I like the Pine Island because they generally are a little bit more colorful and a little larger and have a bit more white to them, all things that I really enjoy. So just depends on your personal preference. For the sake of the video, let's pretend that we're only going to be talking about one male and one female to start your project. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have more than one. In fact, I would highly recommend that you do have more than one pair in mind, just in case the first pair doesn't get along or something happens and you have to separate them. However, for the sake of the video and the examples, I will be talking about pairing individual geckos together in 1-1 pairs, and that is something that you can scale throughout your project to include any new pairs that you bring in or any new animals that you bring in and your intended pairings with them. If you don't really know what you want to work with yet, I highly recommend sort of creating a vision board. Go online, go on Morph Market, go check out other people's web pages and pictures of geckos on the internet and put them together in, grab whichever ones that really speak to you. And then when you have everything together, it will help you start to form a picture of what you actually really do like. So it will help you narrow down what your project should be for you, things that you like. At this stage, don't even look at prices. This is your dream gecko, so shoot for the moon. This is something that is going to be your capstone, your guideline, your goalpost. This is something that is going to be driving you forward. So don't worry about how much it costs. Don't worry about if it's in your budget to get that exact animal right now. Just figure out what is your dream gecko that you would produce. I would stick with adults because babies go through something called an ontogenetic color change, where they change drastically in color from baby to adulthood. That is something I'll probably be going over in a later video. However, in this video, we're going to be talking about adults only, so I recommend looking at adults as your reference point, and that will give you a better idea of what the actual final animal will look like so that you're not breeding towards something like a baby that is not exactly how they're going to look as an adult. Now that you have a rough idea of what you want to work with, if you have your project goal ready to go, let's move on to discussing traits. Traits are characteristics or attributes of an organism that are expressed by genes and or influenced by the environment. we're going to be talking about traits that you can build your Chahoua project around. There are some traits that are super popular, and we're going to be talking about those definitely, but we're also going to be talking about some lesser known or lesser bred for things that can make your project stand out and be special. So we're gonna go over how I tend to think about selective breeding. Now, I keep talking about selective breeding as a concept, but let's define what selective breeding actually is. Selective breeding is the process by which humans use animal breeding selectively and develop particular phenotypic traits or characteristics by choosing which males and females will sexually reproduce and have offspring together. Selective breeding can be a bit hard to wrap your head around. It's a bit like the Wild West. There's not a lot of concrete information about how these genes are working together and how the traits are actually created via the genes that we can't see. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be going over is just sort of a way to think about it and not necessarily like concrete proof of exactly how things work, but it's really just guesswork at this point until we can get some more data about exactly how things work, and even then it may not be super clear cut. So please bear with me. I'm happy to be proven wrong in the future if any of this stuff turns out to be wrong, but I'm working with what I use and I want to share that knowledge with you so that we can all kind of work in the same way towards our goals as fast as possible to get the results that we want out of our projects. I will be giving some tips about how to think about selective breeding and maybe how to get where you want to go, but please be aware that these are just, guesses and hypotheses, and I am not infallible. So I am working really hard to make something that is understandable and useful for you, but I can't necessarily guarantee that every gecko that you produce is going to be exactly what you want. It's a big guessing game, like I said. We've been working on it for many years and still lots of people are just, we don't know exactly how these traits interact. We can only guess. So I've made a few guesses in this video. I know that I could be wrong, and I'm happy to be proven wrong. If we get more data and something comes to light that it's like, this is how this element of traits actually works, then that's awesome. I'm happy to be proven, incorrect or correct or whatever it is. But the more data that we get on these animals, the better it will be for breeding toward your target goals. So I'm always hopeful that the future will mean that we actually have more knowledge about how these things work together. And right now, we're just doing the best that we can with what we have. I'm going to be getting this girl off of me, but she's being very, very good. So now that she's been put away, let's talk about traits and let's talk about how I like to visualize them. So have you ever used a monitor or taken a photo and then you've adjusted the brightness or the contrast of it? Those sliders that you move around? That's how I think of traits. A series of sliders, things that you can adjust. Brightness, saturation, contrast, lightness, all of that stuff. In each individual animal, consider it a set of sliders, and I've actually created a visualization for you, and I know it's a super nerdy thing to do, but hey, I'm a UI artist, so sliders are my life. What can I say? So here are the sliders, and I'm going to talk about what I mean when I'm talking about individual traits and moving the needle on those. Each animal that you produce or buy and add to your project is a way to nudge these traits in the direction that you want them to go. Not everything is represented here, but what is here, we'll go over each one. White collar is when you have white on the area of the neck. So if you see on this little illustration that I've created, there's an area about at the very nape of the neck, base of the head, going all the way down to sort of mid-body. So body white is essentially the same kind of thing as the white collar, but it's found on the body. Usually body white is found in pairs on either side of the dorsum. Now base color, it can range anywhere from golds to peaches to pinks, reds, almost even like a mauve-y color. So what I have represented here is not taking into account the sort of lightness of the color or the saturation of the color. It's just the tone of it, how yellow or how red or how purpley it is. Green coverage is how much green patterning is on the geckos. So, usually you get a couple of different colors on a Chahoua. You get, if there's white, you get that. And then there's usually some sort of warm toned color, but the second color is always going to be a green. There's two different colors and you can have more or less of each, and that can adjust the look of your gecko. Some people really want a green gecko. Some people want no green, some people want a balance. So saturation is something that can heavily impact the look of your gecko. This is something that can take a brown gecko to a bright flaming red gecko. A lot of people really love saturation in their gecko. Sometimes you actually want no saturation though, if you're gonna be going for something like gray tones. Now the lightness slider is pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. It's whether your gecko is lighter or darker. Increasing the lightness slider will mean things like taking a red gecko to a pink gecko, taking and reducing that black to almost none or all the way none. Pattern is something that is really hard to define in one sort of single slider. For the sake of this example, I took one sort of element of pattern, which is striping versus spotting. This is one of those things that I have personally observed and is not like a known thing necessarily. I have animals that produce stripes pretty consistently. It seems like when you have an animal that produces stripes, it also tends to stripe out the other elements of the pattern. The back pattern tends to start running more vertically. That's just one thing that you can use to sort of adjust how elements of color and white and black appear on your animal. There are ones that have like big black dots kind of disconnected, and then there are ones that have a high, very, very strong stripe. Again, I could be wrong on this. Take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, but that is one thing that you can look at. Another thing with pattern that you can look at is increasing a tendency for a specific pattern that you really like. For example, one of my favorite projects that I'm working on is the swirl project. So the swirl project uses very specific swirling, almost man-made patterns that I found in one of my founding animals. She produced it pretty consistently. And so I thought, I really like this pattern. Could I amp it up? Could I make it more contrasty? Could I make it stronger? So pattern is a really cool area that we haven't done a whole lot with, and I think there's a lot of room to grow there, and there's a lot of room to make cool projects. Now, size is another thing that you could breed for. I don't think a lot of people really specifically focus on size alone, but it could be a really interesting project if you wanted to try and make super giant Chahoua, like the biggest that you could. That's definitely something that you could emphasize. Just buy the largest animals that you can. Some other things that you could potentially breed for: temperament. I've actually found that I have pairs that produce consistently calm, really sweet animals, and I have other pairs that produce less consistently nice animals that are generally a little bit more jittery and jumpy and take a little bit more working with. I know this is a kind of a controversial topic, but I believe that there is an inherited element to that. So if that's something that is super important to you, to have like super calm geckos, maybe you do a calm gecko project. Here is the animal that I actually was holding in the beginning of the video as an illustration of where these sliders could relate to an actual real life animal. So here's the picture of the animal, and kind of here's where I would put it on the sliders. So as you can see, the body white is up there, the collar is there, it's highly saturated, but there's also room for it to be more saturated. So I put it about where you see it. The base color is more on the golden side, so that's where I've put the base color. Yeah, you can generally see this is how I would visualize this animal in the form of sliders. This is just a way to imagine traits broadly. It's by no means hard fact information about how these traits work or interact, so this is hypothetical. Now, let's say, for example, that your personal goal was to make a pure black gecko. Obviously, discovering a trait from melanism would be the shortcut here, but let's say right now that we don't have a melanism gene to work with, and we only have selective breeding at our disposal. To start, I think a lot of people, when they think of black geckos, don't think of a colorful gecko. They think pure black, maybe gray, when it's fired down. So let's say for this exercise that the goal for this project might look something like this. Let's say the white, you can take it or leave it. You're more concerned with the overall gecko being as dark black as possible. The lightness slider is as far down as possible. That is our goal. So toning down the saturation would make the gecko look more gray, so I have toned down the saturation all the way to 0 on our dream gecko for this project. I also suggest aiming for high green coverage. Why is that? Well, black tends to fire down as green, so for this hypothetical example, my personal tip would be to try and get as much black coverage as possible, which actually would mean dark green. Then these highlighted traits are going to be your main focus for the project. So I would search for animals that you could pair that might give you results that move those traits or sliders in the direction you want. For example, you might be able to find an overall dark olive green animal with very little other colors, and an animal that can fire up very dark but has a saturated base color. So you're rolling the dice and hoping you get the perfect combination of the two parents. If anyone else out there is working on a dark gecko project, comment below. I want to hear what your thoughts are on this, how you're thinking about making the darkest gecko possible. Now, I know sliders are kind of a silly way to think about things, but I really hope that that visualization helps you wrap your head around the concept of selective breeding for traits when we don't have a lot of concrete data to work with. So I hope that that was helpful for you. It was fun to build, and I would be happy to use that in the future if ever anyone needed it to imagine their own personal project. Also, I spent a lot of time on it. Please clap. So let's move on to a potentially controversial topic of lineage. So a lot of people talk about lineage as if it's kind of a catch-all, right? So let's say you've got two animals and you're choosing between them. You're choosing one with a very storied lineage, and you've got a lot of siblings that look amazing, but the animal looks meh. It's kind of dull and kind of brown, or whatever just isn't working for you. Whereas the other animal, it has lineage, but it's not as well documented in terms of what the siblings look like and everything like that, but you do know the lineage of the animal, so you're aware of the locality of the animal, but it looks a lot better. Which animal would you choose? I know a lot of breeders would say to choose the animal with lineage, but I'm gonna say it's the other animal for me. And the reason is because all we have to work on are phenotypes. With selective breeding, we look at the phenotype, which is the traits that the animal is physically displaying, right? So yeah, there may be recessive traits. Maybe there's things that are hidden in the animal that are gonna be really amazing, right? But we don't know that. All we know is what we can see with our eyes, because we don't have the data. We don't have the knowledge of exactly how these genes are interacting or how they're inherited. If we look at the siblings of the one with the good lineage, let's say, and they're all incredibly vibrant, yeah? But this animal is not. There's no guarantee that this animal that doesn't look as vibrant as its siblings is going to produce vibrant offspring, because it may simply not have the gene that the siblings have. Now, that's not to say that Lineage is not important. It's actually really useful, especially if you're buying babies. That is where it becomes super, super helpful to have those pictures of offspring and parents and everything else, because you're basically guessing what the animal is going to look like when it grows up. So having all of those tools around to help you figure that out is incredibly valuable, and that is why we always take photos of all of our animals, all of our offspring, keep all of that records, because it's helpful for people buying a young animal to be able to see what it could potentially grow into. However, if we're talking about adult animals that are fully grown, they're ready to breed, you know, they're going to be part of your project, and you're looking at them and thinking, yeah, it's not exactly what I want, but the sister looks really nice. That's no guarantee that this animal is going to be able to produce animals that look like that, because we just don't know. So we don't know. And I think it would be in that situation, if you had the choice between the two animals, I'm gonna choose the one that looks nice every time, because that is an animal that I can look at with my own eyes and say, that is what I want to add to my project. Those are the sliders I want to manipulate. So I would prefer to buy that animal, not even knowing what the siblings look like, if it is gorgeous, because I know at least in the animal itself, it has the potential to pass that on, right? So that's what I do when I look at these things. It may be different, a different process from other breeders, and it probably is. I'm probably in the minority here on this one, but I would say it's something to consider. And if it's helpful for you to be able to think about what animals to purchase, then that's great. I've done my job. So, you know, that's just one tip that I have for you, and I hope that it's helpful. Now we're going to talk about your budget, which is going to be sort of the coming back down to earth factor of all of this planning that we've been doing. We're also going to be talking about the timeline that you will have for getting from point A, which is your founding animals, to point B, which is your final amazing goal animal that you've been wanting to create all this time. Now, part of that is going to be impacted by the traits that you want to work with. So if you are wanting to work with the most expensive traits out there, super, super high body weight, super, super high white collar, super, super saturated, then that is going to impact how soon you can reach your goals. If you can only afford, let's say your budget for each animal is $1,000, right? You're gonna have to be a little bit more realistic about where you're stepping into the project. You can get there, you can get there. It's just picking your animals wisely and knowing that the further away you are from your goal animal, the likely longer it's going to take to get there. So if you're expecting to be able to produce, you know, a $30,000 animal in the next 3 years, but your budget is $700, it's probably not gonna happen. You could hit the lottery. You could get that one animal that comes out and just shocks everyone, but don't plan on it. Timeline and a budget are directly, diametrically opposed. The longer that your timeline is to get to where you wanna go, the cheaper you can start. If budget is your main limiting factor, which it is for most people, then just get the best animals that you can afford. Get the closest you can with the money that you have. While you can definitely get results on a budget, it does take a while usually. We've been doing this for over a decade, and it's taken us exactly that long to get the results that we have today, because we were the exact same way. We started with a low budget. I started with 4 founding animals, 2 of which had hardly any white on them. And from those 4 animals, we bred them for several years and held back the absolute cream of the crop. I traded for some other animals, got those babies, got the best babies that they could produce, bred them, etc. We're about 4 generations into our projects now. So, you know, it takes time But we've been able to get there with that, you know, as long as you're okay taking that time, investing that time, then, you know, you can get there. It is possible. It's going to involve luck, and it's going to involve having a good eye and choosing the animals that will move you in the direction of your goal animal. If you have a high budget to spend, start with a little bit of a higher budget and you'll get there sooner. So it really depends on how quick you want to get in, your budget, what you can actually afford, and what your goals are. Because if your goals are actually like, you know, I just want a pure green gecko, or I just want a pure red gecko, that's my holy grail, then it's probably going to be pretty easy to get there. So it really depends on your project, it depends on your budget, and it depends on your timeline. Well, I know I rambled a lot, and I hope that I made some sense, but I hope that this video helps you get closer to creating your project and getting closer towards getting your dream Chahoua in your project. There's so much that we can do that we haven't even explored yet. Yes, white collar and white body, that's gonna be the hot thing right now, and it has been, and it probably always will be to an extent, but there's just so much possibility in here. There's so much possibility with this species, and they make such amazing pets. I really think it's worth jumping into. I know that the market is the way it is right now, but actually that makes right now the best time to jump in. You buy low and sell high, right? That's Wally Kern said that as well. I know it's like a Wall Street thing, but you know, I recently rewatched one of his videos where he discussed the market, and I think he's right. Right now is actually the best time to buy your animals because the breeders are going to be having them listed at much more reasonable prices. So you may be able to afford a better animal now than you ever could before. So it's a great time to get started. And I really think that this species has a long way to go from being, you know, done to death. We have very few Chahoua breeders out there that are dedicated to just breeding this species. So there is absolutely room for you. And I really want to welcome you in. If you aren't already part of this community, if you're curious about it and you're learning more, please continue to watch this channel. I'll be uploading more videos. Please subscribe, like this video if you enjoyed it. Leave a comment below and tell me about your dream projects. Hit the notification bell to get notified every time I upload a video. And I can't wait to see what you all are making. Best of luck in your 2025 breeding season, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.